Dad missed my wedding for his stepson's game, then asked me to pay for his cancer treatment when he ghosted him. I'm Lisa, 32, female, and I honestly never thought I'd be writing something like this on Reddit. But after everything that's happened in the past few months, I need to get this off my chest and get some perspective from people who don't know my family dynamics. My parents divorced when I was 12. It was messy, like most divorces involving kids. But what made it worse was how quickly my dad moved on. Within 6 months, he was dating Sandra, a woman with a 10-year-old son named Kyle. They got married when I was 14, and from that moment on, my life changed completely. Let me paint you a picture of what my childhood became. Kyle was everything to my dad. This kid could do no wrong. He was athletic, played multiple sports, and my dad threw himself into being the supportive stepdad with an intensity that honestly made me uncomfortable, even as a teenager. Every weekend was consumed by Kyle's games, practices, tournaments. Every dinner conversation revolved around Kyle's achievements, Kyle's potential, Kyle's future. Meanwhile, I was the honor roll student who played violin, participated in debate team, and volunteered at the local animal shelter. But none of that seemed to matter because it wasn't sports related. When I made first chair in the school orchestra, my dad said, "That's nice, honey," and immediately pivoted to asking Kyle about his upcoming baseball tryouts. When I won the state debate championship, he missed the ceremony because Kyle had a scrimmage. Don't get me wrong, Kyle wasn't a bad kid. He was actually pretty decent to me, and I don't blame him for any of this. This was entirely about my dad's choices and priorities. Kyle didn't ask to be put on a pedestal, but my dad sure as hell put him there and worshipped at it every single day. Sandra, to her credit, would sometimes try to include me or suggest my dad pay attention to my achievements. But she was also a mom protecting her son's interests, so she wasn't exactly pushing hard when my dad's favoritism benefited Kyle. The pattern continued through high school. I graduated salutatorian, got into my dream college with partial academic scholarships, but the celebration dinner was cut short because Kyle had a playoff game. I played violin at graduation, but my dad spent most of the ceremony on his phone, checking Kyle's tournament scores. College was a relief. I could finally breathe without constantly being compared to or overlooked in favor of the golden Stepson. I majored in engineering, landed internships at great companies, and built a life that I was proud of. My dad would call occasionally, but most of our conversations were updates about Kyle's football career, Kyle's college recruitment, Kyle's full ride scholarship to state. I met my now husband, James, during my senior year of college. He's a doctor, kind, funny, and came from a family that actually valued all their children equally. When I brought him home to meet my dad and Sandra, the entire visit was dominated by Kyle's highlight reels and recruitment videos. James later told me he couldn't believe how little my dad seemed to know about my life and accomplishments, but I was used to it. I'd learned to manage my expectations and find validation elsewhere. I had a successful career, a man who loved me, and I was planning a beautiful future. When James proposed, I was over the moon. We started planning our wedding, and despite everything, I wanted my dad to walk me down the aisle. He's still my father, all those years of feeling second best. And I still had this hope that maybe, just maybe, my wedding day would be different. We set the date for October 15th, sent save the dates 6 months in advance, and followed up with official invitations 2 months later. My dad RSVP'd yes. He said he was excited and honored to walk me down the aisle. Sandra seemed genuinely happy for me too, but here's where it gets complicated. Kyle was playing college football, and apparently their homecoming game was scheduled for October 14th. When my dad found out, he mentioned it, but assured me it wouldn't be a problem. The game was Saturday afternoon. My wedding was Saturday evening. He could make it to both, except Kyle's team made it to the conference championship, and the game got moved to October 15th, my wedding day. 3:00 p.m. kickoff, 6:00 p.m. wedding ceremony. My dad called me 3 weeks before the wedding. I still remember exactly where I was standing in my apartment kitchen when he told me he had a situation. He explained about the championship game, how it was Kyle's senior year, how this was Kyle's one shot at playing in a championship. He said he was torn and didn't know what to do. I told him there was nothing to be torn about. It was my wedding day. I was his daughter. Kyle would have other games, other opportunities, but I was only getting married once. Surely Kyle would understand if his stepdad missed one game for his stepsister's wedding. My dad got quiet. Then he said, "Well, the thing is, Kyle's been counting on me being there. I've never missed one of his important games. And Sandra thinks it would be really harmful to his confidence if I wasn't there for the championship." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Dad, it's my wedding." "I know, sweetheart. And I wish there was a way to do both, but the timing just doesn't work. The game is 3 hours away, and with traffic after the game, there's no way I could make it to the ceremony on time. So, choose me," I said. "For once in my life, choose me." The silence stretched on forever. Finally, he said, "Kyle needs me there. This is his moment. You'll have James's dad walk you down the aisle. He loves you like his own daughter anyway." I hung up on him. I actually hung up on my father 3 weeks before my wedding. James found me crying in the kitchen an hour later. When I told him what happened, he was furious. He wanted to call my dad himself, but I stopped him. I knew it wouldn't change anything. My dad had made his choice, just like he'd been making the same choice my entire life. Sandra called me the next day. She was crying, saying she felt terrible, that she'd told my dad he should come to my wedding, but that Kyle was just devastated at the thought of his stepdad missing his championship game. She said Kyle had even offered to help pay for a private plane so my dad could make it to both, but the timing still wouldn't work. I told Sandra I understood her position, but I was done. I was tired of coming second to Kyle, tired of being the afterthought, tired of my own father treating me like an obligation instead of a priority. The wedding was beautiful. James's dad walked me down the aisle, and honestly, he was probably more emotional about it than my own father would have been. James's parents had taken me in as their own, and their love and support got me through what should have been the happiest day of my life. My dad texted me that night, "Congratulations, sweetie. Kyle won the championship. Wish I could have been there with you too. Love you." I didn't respond. After that, I went pretty much no contact with my dad. He'd call occasionally, leave voicemails about wanting to work things out, but I wasn't ready. I was tired of being hurt by someone who was supposed to love me unconditionally. Meanwhile, Kyle graduated college and got drafted by an NFL team. Not a starter position, but he made the practice squad. My dad was over the moon, posting about it constantly on Facebook, talking about my son, the professional athlete. It stung, but I tried to focus on my own life. James and I settled into married life. I got promoted to senior engineer at my company. We bought a house, got a dog, traveled. Life was good when I wasn't thinking about family dynamics, but my dad kept trying. He'd send cards on my birthday, Christmas gifts, photos from Kyle's games. I'd open them, feel that familiar mixture of hurt and anger, and usually end up throwing them away. James kept encouraging me to at least have a conversation, to try to repair the relationship, but I wasn't ready. Kyle got married 2 years after I did. My dad posted hundreds of photos from the wedding, talked about how proud he was to walk Kyle down the aisle for the father-son dance, how Kyle was like his real son. That particular Facebook post sent me into therapy, which was probably overdue anyway. Dr. Martina, as my therapist, helped me work through a lot of the childhood trauma and ongoing hurt. She helped me understand that my dad's behavior was about his own issues, not my worth as a person. She also helped me realize that I was allowed to protect myself from further hurt, even if that meant maintaining distance from my father. 3 years passed. Kyle bounced between a couple of NFL teams, never quite making it as a starter. My dad's Facebook posts became less frequent, and when Kyle got cut from his third team, the posts about professional football stopped altogether. Then Kyle moved to California, got a job in sports marketing, and started building a life on the other coast. My dad's visits to see him became less frequent, and from what I could tell through Sandra's occasional Facebook updates, Kyle was busy with his own life and not calling home as much. I should mention that James and I had been trying to have kids during this time. We went through 2 rounds of IVF that didn't take, had a miscarriage at 12 weeks, and were emotionally and financially drained from the whole process. We decided to take a break from trying and focus on each other for a while. My dad had no idea about any of this, of course, because we weren't in contact. But Sandra had seen some of my posts and apparently figured it out because she sent me a card expressing sympathy. It was actually really sweet, and for a moment I considered reaching out to my dad, but then I remembered my wedding day and I put the card in a drawer. Last September, Sandra called me. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number, but something made me pick up. Hi, sweetie, it's Sandra. I know you and your dad haven't been talking, but I needed to tell you something. My blood went cold. Is he okay? He's been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The doctors are saying he needs to start chemo immediately, and even then, she started crying. I felt like the world had stopped. My dad was only 58. Kyle was like a son to him, but I was still his actual daughter. Despite everything, I loved him. When did you find out? I asked. 2 weeks ago. We wanted to wait until we had more information before telling anyone. The treatment is going to be expensive, even with insurance, and he's going to need a lot of support. Have you told Kyle? Sandra got quiet. We called him right after the diagnosis. He was supportive at first, said he'd come home to help however he could. At first. Well, when we told him about the treatment costs and asked if he could help financially, he kind of backed off. He said he's got his own expenses. His new job doesn't pay as much as football would have, and he suggested we look into financial aid programs. My heart sank, not because Kyle couldn't or wouldn't help, but because I could predict exactly what was coming next. Sandra, why are you really calling me? Your dad wants to talk to you. He knows he messed up, and he wants to make things right, but also, we're scared about the money situation. Your dad's going to have to take time off work for treatment, and our savings aren't going to cover everything. There it was. My father, who had chosen his stepson over me for my entire adult life, was now in a position where his golden child couldn't help him. So he was turning to the daughter he'd neglected. Sandra, I need to think about this. Can you give me a few days? Of course, but honey, please don't wait too long. The doctors want to start treatment as soon as possible. I called James at work and told him everything. He was quiet for a long time, then said, "What do you want to do?" I don't know. Part of me wants to help because he's my dad and I love him, but part of me is furious that he's only reaching out now because Kyle can't or won't help with money. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Martinez. I got an emergency session with my therapist the next day. Dr. Martinez listened to everything, then asked, "What would helping your father look like to you? What would you need from him to feel comfortable with that decision?" I'd need him to acknowledge what he did. Not just apologize, but really understand how his choices affected me. And I'd need to know that he wants a relationship with me as his daughter, not just as a source of financial support. And if he can't or won't do that, then I guess I have my answer. I called my dad that evening. Sandra must have been waiting by the phone because she answered immediately and quickly handed it to him. "Sweetheart, God, it's so good to hear your voice." He sounded older, more fragile than I remembered. Despite everything, hearing the fear and vulnerability in his voice broke my heart a little. "Hi, Dad. Sandra told me about the diagnosis. I'm sorry." "Thank you. I know we haven't talked in a while, and that's on me. I've made a lot of mistakes as a father." "Yes, you have." He was quiet for a moment. "I guess I deserve that." "Look, I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything after the way I've treated you, but I'm scared, and I need my daughter." "Which daughter, Dad? The one you walked down the aisle, or the one whose wedding you missed for Kyle's football game?" Another silence. "I walked Kyle down the aisle because his dad wasn't in his life. I thought I was being the father figure he needed." "And what about being the father figure I needed? You had me. You always had me." "No, Dad. I had the leftover pieces of you after Kyle got the best parts. I had the distracted conversations and the half-hearted congratulations and the constant feeling that I was competing with your stepson for my own father's attention." I could hear him crying. "I didn't realize. I thought I was treating you both fairly. You missed my wedding, Dad. My wedding for a football game. I know. I knew it was wrong even when I was doing it, but Kyle needed me there, and I thought you'd understand because you've always been so independent and strong." I was independent and strong because I had to be, because my father was too busy being Kyle's dad to be mine. We both cried for a few minutes. Finally, he said, "How do I fix this? How do I make it right?" "I don't know if you can, Dad, but if you want to try, you need to start by being honest with me. Are you calling because you want your daughter back or because you need money for cancer treatment?" Another long pause. "Both. I need help with the medical expenses, but I also realize that Kyle he's not who I thought he was." When we told him about the money situation, he basically said it wasn't his problem, said he had his own life to worry about. And now you want me to step in where Kyle stepped out? I want my daughter back. The money, if you can help, I'd be grateful. But even if you can't, I want to try to have a relationship with you again. Dad, I need you to understand something. If I help you through this, it's not going to be like the old days where I come second to Kyle. If I'm going to be your daughter, I need to be your daughter, not your backup plan when your preferred child isn't available. You were never my backup plan. You were always my daughter. Then why does it feel like I've spent my whole life fighting for scraps of your attention? We talked for 2 more hours that night. He told me about the diagnosis, the treatment plan, the financial reality of cancer care. I told him about the miscarriage, the IVF failures, the years of hurt and resentment I'd been carrying. By the end of the conversation, we'd agreed to try. I would help with the medical expenses, and he would work on being the father I'd always needed. The first few months were hard. My dad started chemo in October, and Sandra kept me updated on his progress. I sent money for treatments, medications, home care when he was too sick to take care of himself. But more importantly, my dad started calling me regularly, not to ask for money, but to actually talk. He asked about my work, my marriage, my life. He listened when I told him about struggling with infertility. He even asked if he and Sandra could come visit for Christmas. The visit went better than I expected. My dad looked frail from the chemo, but he seemed genuinely interested in reconnecting. He brought photo albums from my childhood that he'd kept, showing James pictures of my violin recital, debate team victories, academic awards. It was surreal seeing him suddenly proud of things he'd barely acknowledged at the time. On Christmas Eve, while Sandra was helping James in the kitchen, my dad and I sat by the tree talking. I need to tell you something, he said. Kyle hasn't called since Thanksgiving. When I told him you were helping with the medical bills, he said he was glad someone else was taking care of it. Dad, you don't need to. Yes, I do. You need to know that I see it now. I see what I did, and I see who my children really are. Kyle was never my son in the ways that mattered. He was a good kid that I got attached to, but when things got hard, he walked away. You're my daughter, and even after everything I put you through, you showed up. I started crying. I showed up because I love you, Dad. Despite everything, you're still my father. I don't deserve you. I spent so many years chasing after Kyle's approval, trying to be the dad he never had, that I forgot to be the dad you needed. I missed your wedding for a football game that ultimately didn't matter at all. Dad, let me finish. I want you to know that if I could go back and change everything, I would. I would be at every violin recital. I would celebrate every achievement. I would walk you down the aisle and tell Kyle to find his own ride to his football game. We both cried that night, but they were healing tears. James and I ended up hosting my dad and Sandra for 2 weeks. It was the longest consecutive time my dad and I had spent together since I was a teenager, and it was revelatory. He was actually funny when he wasn't distracted by Kyle's sports schedule. He was interested in my work, asked thoughtful questions about engineering projects I was working on. He wanted to hear about our travels, our plans for the future. Most importantly, he never once mentioned Kyle unless I brought him up. The chemo was working. By March, my dad's scans showed the tumors shrinking. The oncologist was cautiously optimistic about his prognosis. We were all starting to hope that he might beat this thing. That's when Kyle called. I wasn't there for the conversation, but Sandra told me about it later. Apparently, Kyle had seen some of my dad's Facebook posts about successful treatment and the improved prognosis. He called to check in and mentioned that he was thinking about moving back to the Midwest, maybe looking for jobs closer to home. When my dad asked what had prompted the sudden interest in coming home, Kyle said he'd realized how much family meant to him and wanted to be closer to his parents. Sandra said my dad was polite but distant. He told Kyle he was glad to hear he was doing well, but that he was focused on his recovery and his relationship with me right now. Kyle apparently got upset and said he didn't understand why my dad was choosing her over me again. My dad told him that he'd never chosen me over Kyle, but that he was done choosing Kyle over me. The conversation ended with Kyle accusing my dad of being ungrateful after everything Kyle had done for our family, and my dad pointing out that Kyle hadn't done anything for our family in over a year. They haven't spoken since. It's been 6 months now since my dad finished his treatment. His most recent scans were clear. The doctors are optimistic that he'll make a full recovery. My dad and I talk at least twice a week. He and Sandra came to visit again for Easter, and we're planning a vacation together this summer. It feels strange to have a real relationship with my father at age 32, but I'm grateful for it. James keeps joking that it only took a cancer diagnosis to turn my dad into an actual parent, but honestly, I think the cancer just forced him to reevaluate his priorities. Facing mortality has a way of clarifying what really matters. Kyle sent me a Facebook message a few weeks ago, asking if I could talk some sense into Dad because they used to be so close and he didn't understand what had changed. I didn't respond. I've learned that some relationships are worth fighting for and others are just comfortable patterns that fall apart when tested. My dad chose Kyle over me for most of my life, right up until Kyle had the opportunity to choose my dad back and didn't. I'm not proud of the fact that it took my dad's golden child abandoning him for him to see my worth, but I'm grateful for the relationship we have now. The money I spent on my dad's medical care was significant, probably close to $40,000 over the course of his treatment, but it was worth every penny to have my father back. And honestly, seeing Kyle's true character come out when my dad needed him most just confirmed that my dad's years of favoritism were misplaced. My dad missed my wedding for Kyle's football game. Kyle missed my dad's cancer treatment for his own convenience. I guess that tells you everything you need to know about who we really are as people. I'm not saying my dad is perfect now, or that our relationship doesn't still have work to do, but for the first time in my adult life, I feel like I have a father who sees me, values me, and chooses me. That's worth more than any amount of money. Update 1 posted 2 months later. A few people have been asking for updates, and honestly, a lot has happened since my original post. First, the good news. My dad's 6-month scans came back completely clear. His oncologist is cautiously optimistic that he's beaten this thing. He's back to work part-time and feeling stronger every day. But the family drama has escalated in ways I didn't expect. Last month, Kyle showed up at my dad's house unannounced. Apparently, he'd driven across the country to surprise my dad and try to reconcile. Sandra called me while it was happening because she didn't know what to do. According to Sandra, Kyle showed up with a sob story about how his job in California wasn't working out, how he was struggling financially, and how he'd realized that family was the most important thing. He wanted to move back home and help take care of my dad during his recovery. My dad, to his credit, didn't fall for it. He told Kyle that he appreciated him coming, but that Kyle had had his chance to be supportive during the actual cancer treatment and had chosen not to be. He said Kyle was welcome to visit, but that moving back home wasn't going to happen. Kyle apparently lost it, started yelling about how ungrateful my dad was. How Kyle had sacrificed his relationship with his biological father to have a relationship with my dad. That dad owed him for all the years Kyle had been the perfect son. Then Kyle said something that I think really showed his true colors. You're choosing that over me because she has money. You don't actually care about her. You just want her to pay your bills. My dad kicked him out. Just straight up told him to leave and not come back. Kyle called me that night screaming and crying, asking me to convince my dad to forgive him. He said I'd poisoned my dad against him and that I'd ruined their relationship out of jealousy. I told Kyle that I hadn't said a single negative word about him to my dad, and that maybe my dad's opinion of him had changed because of Kyle's own actions, not because of anything I'd done. Kyle then offered to split my dad with me. He said we could both help with expenses and both have relationships with him. When I pointed out that I'd been the only one helping with expenses for almost a year, Kyle said he'd pay me back when he got back on his feet. I told Kyle that my relationship with my dad wasn't a business transaction and hung up on him. But Kyle wasn't done. He apparently spent the next week calling extended family members, telling them that I'd manipulated my dad during his illness and turned him against Kyle. He told my aunt, my dad's sister, that I'd been financially elder abusing my dad and that my dad was afraid to speak up because he was dependent on my money. My aunt called my dad to check on him, and my dad set the record straight. He told her the whole story about missing my wedding, about Kyle's response to his cancer diagnosis, about me stepping up when Kyle stepped back. The family has pretty much rallied around my dad and me now. My uncle, my dad's brother, even called Kyle directly and told him to stop spreading lies about his own family. But the most surprising development came last week. James and I found out we're pregnant. We're only 8 weeks along, so we're being cautious given our history. But so far, everything looks good. My dad was the second person we told, after my mother-in-law, who James is very close to. He cried happy tears and asked if he could start buying baby stuff. It was such a stark contrast to how he'd reacted to other milestones in my life. We haven't told Kyle and we don't plan to. Sandra knows because she was there when we told my dad, but we've asked her to keep it private for now. I keep thinking about how different this pregnancy feels compared to our previous attempts. Having my dad's genuine excitement and support means everything to me. He's already talking about teaching the baby to fish and asking if we want him to convert his spare bedroom into a nursery for when we visit. It's surreal having a father who's actually invested in my life and my future. I just wish it hadn't taken 30 plus years and a cancer scare to get here. As for Kyle, he's apparently moved back to the Midwest, but not back home. He's living with friends and working at a sporting goods store. Sandra occasionally gets texts from him, but they're usually asking for money or complaining about how unfairly he's been treated. I feel bad for Sandra sometimes. She's watching the son she raised turn into someone she doesn't recognize while also seeing my dad build a real relationship with me for the first time. It can't be easy for her, but she's been nothing but supportive of my dad and me reconnecting. She even told me she was proud of me for forgiving my dad and giving him a chance to be better. I don't know what the future holds with Kyle. Part of me hopes he'll eventually get his act together and apologize for real, but I'm not holding my breath. For now, I'm focused on my growing family, my recovering father, and the relationship we're still building. It's not perfect, but it's real in a way it never was before. Update 2 posted 4 months later. I'm now 20 weeks pregnant, and we found out we're having a girl. My dad was over the moon when we told him. He immediately started talking about tea parties and ballet classes and protecting her from boys until she's 30. It's so sweet to see him excited about being a grandfather. But Kyle has escalated his behavior in ways that have forced us to take legal action. It started with him showing up at my workplace. I work for an engineering firm downtown, and Kyle somehow found out where, and came to the reception desk asking to see me. Thankfully, our security is pretty good, and they called me before letting him up. I told them I didn't want to see him and to ask him to leave. Kyle apparently made a scene, telling the receptionist that I was his sister and that we had a family emergency. When she said I declined to see him, he started yelling about how I was a heartless who had destroyed his family. Security escorted him out, but not before several of my colleagues witnessed the whole thing. My boss called me into his office to make sure I was okay and to ask if there were any safety concerns he needed to know about. The next week, Kyle started calling my house at all hours. He'd call at 2 o'clock a.m., 5 a.m., during dinner, during my husband's on-call shifts at the hospital. The messages ranged from pathetic pleas for me to fix things with my dad to angry rants about how I'd stolen his father and ruined his life. Then he started showing up at my house. The first time, James answered the door while I was at work. Kyle was drunk and belligerent, demanding to know why James had let me destroy Kyle's relationship with my dad. James told him to leave, and when Kyle refused, James called the police. Kyle was gone by the time the cops arrived, but they took a report and suggested we consider a restraining order if he kept showing up. We should have listened to that advice immediately. 3 days later, I came home from work to find Kyle sitting in my driveway. He'd been there for hours, according to my neighbor, just sitting on the hood of his car waiting for me. When I pulled up, he got off his car and walked toward mine. I stayed in my car and called James, who was at the hospital, but said he'd leave immediately. Kyle started knocking on my car window, saying he just wanted to talk. I rolled the window down about an inch and told him to leave or I'd call the police. That's when Kyle completely lost it. He started screaming about how I was a spoiled brat who had always been jealous of him, how I'd manipulated my dad during a vulnerable time, how I was just like my crazy mother. My mom, who Kyle has met maybe 3 times in his life. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. You think you're so perfect with your perfect marriage and your perfect job, and now you're having a perfect baby, but bad things happen to people who destroy families. Karma's a... I rolled up my window and called 911. Kyle must have realized he'd crossed a line because he got back in his car and left before the police arrived. But this time, I pressed charges. The combination of the workplace incident, the harassing phone calls, and the threatening behavior at my house was enough for the prosecutor to file charges for stalking and making terroristic threats. Kyle was arrested a week later. He spent 2 nights in jail before Sandra bailed him out against my dad's wishes. My dad was furious when he found out what Kyle had been doing. He called Kyle and told him that if he ever contacted me or James again, my dad would testify against him in court. He also told Kyle that he was no longer welcome in my dad's life, and that Sandra needed to choose between supporting Kyle's harassment of me or maintaining her marriage. Sandra chose my dad and me. She told Kyle he couldn't stay at their house anymore and that she wouldn't give him any more money. She also gave us copies of text messages Kyle had sent her, including ones where he talked about teaching me a lesson and making me pay for turning my dad against him. The legal process has been stressful, especially being pregnant, but our lawyer says we have a strong case. Kyle's been ordered to have no contact with me, James, or my dad while the charges are pending. But the most heartbreaking part of all this has been watching my dad blame himself. He keeps saying that Kyle's behavior is his fault for creating a monster through years of favoritism and enabling. I've had to remind my dad multiple times that Kyle is an adult who made his own choices. Yes, my dad's favoritism was harmful and unfair, but Kyle's response to losing that favoritism has revealed who he really is as a person. The whole situation has actually brought my dad and me even closer together. He's been incredibly protective and supportive throughout this whole ordeal. He even offered to hire private security for me, which I thought was sweet but unnecessary. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, has been helping me process all of this. She pointed out that Kyle's reaction to losing his status as the favorite child is very telling. A healthy person would have responded to my dad's cancer diagnosis with support and love, regardless of their relationship history. Kyle's immediate focus on money and his later harassment campaign show that his attachment to my dad was never really about love. It was about what my dad could do for him. My dad is starting to see that too. He told me last week that he'd spent so many years trying to earn Kyle's love and approval that he'd never stopped to question whether Kyle actually loved him back or just loved what he provided. It's sad, but also freeing in a way. My dad is no longer carrying the guilt of disappointing Kyle, and I'm no longer competing with Kyle for my father's attention. The baby is due in October, and my dad has already requested time off work to come help after she's born. He wants to be the hands-on grandfather he never really got to be as a father. Sandra's excited too. She's already knitting blankets and booties. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Kyle had just stepped up when my dad was diagnosed with cancer. If he'd been supportive and loving, would my dad and I ever have reconciled? Would I have just remained the forgotten daughter while Kyle remained the golden child? But then I remember that Kyle had the chance to show who he really was when it mattered most, and he chose to walk away. My dad needed his family, and only one of his children showed up. I showed up not because I expected anything in return, but because despite everything, I loved my dad and couldn't stand the thought of him facing cancer alone. Kyle stayed away because my dad's illness was inconvenient and expensive. I think that tells you everything you need to know about both of us. The court date is next month. Our lawyer thinks Kyle will probably plead to a lesser charge and get probation, but he'll have a criminal record and will be ordered to stay away from us permanently. Honestly, I just want this whole chapter closed so I can focus on my pregnancy, my marriage, and the relationship I'm still building with my dad. For the first time in my life, I feel like I have the father I always wanted. I just wish it hadn't taken so long to get here. Update 3 posted 6 months later. Kyle ended up pleading guilty to a reduced charge of harassment and received 2 years of probation, mandatory counseling, and a restraining order prohibiting him from contacting me, James, or my dad. The relief I felt when the judge read out that order is indescribable. Knowing that there are legal consequences if Kyle tries to approach me again has given me the peace of mind I needed, especially with the baby on the way. I gave birth to our daughter, Amelia Rose, in early October. The labor was long and exhausting, but when I held her in my arms for the first time, every ounce of pain and fear melted away. James cried harder than I've ever seen him cry, and my dad was a mess of happy tears too. He told me she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen and that he was honored to finally be present for one of the biggest moments of my life. He spent 2 weeks with us after Amelia was born, cooking meals, running errands, and holding her every chance he got. Sandra was there too, doting on her first grandchild. She knitted the most adorable little pink blanket that Amelia sleeps with every night. My dad kept saying how grateful he was that he got this second chance, not just to be a father to me, but to be a grandfather to Amelia. There was a moment, late one night, when I was sitting in the nursery rocking Amelia back to sleep. My dad came in quietly, sat down across from me, and whispered, "I missed so much, Lisa, but I swear to you, I'll never miss another moment of your life or hers again." It broke me in the best way possible. For once I believed him. Meanwhile, Kyle has continued his downward spiral. Sandra hears from him occasionally, usually when he needs money. She hasn't given him any since the restraining order, and my dad refuses to speak to him at all. Word has gotten back to us through extended family that Kyle's been couch hopping, working odd jobs, and complaining about how unfairly he's been treated. But neither Sandra nor my dad feels guilty anymore. They've finally realized that Kyle's problems are the result of his own choices. I used to think I wanted Kyle to apologize, to take responsibility for everything, but now I've accepted that he probably never will, and that's okay. My focus is on Amelia, on James, and on the healthier relationship I've built with my dad. Therapy has helped me come to terms with the fact that some wounds never fully heal. My dad will never be able to give me back the childhood he neglected, the milestones he missed, or the wedding he chose not to attend. But he's here now. He's present. He's trying. And when I see him cradling Amelia and singing to her off-key, I know I made the right choice in giving him another chance. The financial side of everything hasn't been easy. Between the IVF treatments, miscarriage, and then covering part of my dad's cancer expenses, James and I drained a lot of our savings. But James reminded me that money can be replaced. People can't. And honestly, I'd pay it all again to have what I have now, a dad who finally chooses me. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if my dad had walked me down the aisle all those years ago. Would I have forgiven him sooner? Would Kyle's true colors have shown up anyway? I don't know. What I do know is this. When my daughter grows up, she'll never have to question whether her parents are proud of her. She'll never have to fight for scraps of our attention. She'll know, without a doubt, that she's loved. And maybe that's the greatest gift to come out of all this, breaking the cycle, choosing to be better for the next generation. Final update, posted 1 year later. Amelia just turned 1 last week. We had a small family party at our house, with balloons, a smash cake, and way too many presents. My dad was there, of course, helping James string up decorations, and making Amelia giggle with silly faces. Sandra sat with me in the kitchen at one point and said quietly, "You know, I've never seen your dad this happy. He's different now. You saved him." I don't know if I saved him, but I do know that having Amelia brought all of us closer together. My dad calls her his second chance. He takes her on stroller walks, reads her bedtime stories when they visit, and brags about her to anyone who will listen. For the first time in my life, I feel like he's proud of me, not just for what I've accomplished, but for who I am. His health has been steadily improving. His oncologist officially declared him in remission 6 months ago. He's back at work full-time and even joined a support group for other cancer survivors. He says facing his own mortality was the wake-up call he needed to see how badly he had failed me. Sometimes he still breaks down about the past, missing my wedding, overlooking my achievements, choosing Kyle again and again. But now, instead of excuses, he offers apologies. And more importantly, he shows me every day that he means it. As for Kyle, the restraining order is still in effect. After his probation hearing, he disappeared from most of our family's radar. We hear bits and pieces. He's been in and out of jobs, burned bridges with most of the extended family, and is living alone in a rented room. My aunt told me he tried to contact her for money, spinning the same old sob story, but she refused. My dad hasn't spoken to him in over a year, and Sandra finally told Kyle point blank that she wouldn't enable him anymore. I thought I'd feel satisfaction seeing the golden child fall from grace, but honestly, what I feel is sadness. Sadness for Sandra, who did her best to raise him. Sadness that my dad wasted so many years pouring himself into someone who only saw him as a wallet, and maybe even a little sadness for Kyle himself. But that sadness doesn't mean I'll ever let him back into my life. Protecting Amelia, protecting my peace, comes first. My therapist once told me, healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about creating a future that isn't defined by it. I think about that a lot. My past will always be marked by favoritism, neglect, and a father who missed my wedding for a football game. But my present is filled with laughter, milestones, and a father who shows up for me and his granddaughter in ways I never thought possible. At Amelia's birthday, James's dad gave a toast. He said, "This little girl is surrounded by love, and that's all a child really needs." My dad raised his glass, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "Amen." So where do I stand now? Kyle is out of my life permanently, and that's how it has to be. My dad and I are closer than ever, though it's a relationship built on hard truths and years of hurt that we'll never fully erase. But for once, I feel chosen, I feel seen, and when I look at Amelia, I know the cycle ends with me. She will never wonder where she stands in my heart. She will never beg for scraps of attention. She will grow up knowing she is enough. That's the ending I didn't know I needed.